Hey y'all, welcome to Marcy in the Middle, a podcast about transitions and the middle of life. Here we talk about everything from relationships to finding your place in the world and lots more. We'll talk with friends from all walks of life and find out what they've learned along the way. So whether you feel young or old or somewhere in between, this is the place for you. Welcome to the Middle. Today's guest is Leslie Clingenpeel. She's an activist and advocate for victims of human trafficking and domestic violence and serves as the executive director at The Spring, which is a licensed shelter for victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, and human sex trafficking. Leslie and her family reside in the Sand Springs area. Now let's talk to Leslie. Welcome to the podcast, Leslie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about human trafficking and The Spring, which you are the executive director there.
Yes.
And you do all kinds of really good work for actually local Oklahoma victims and things like that. So I'm going to just kind of let you start off by telling us what exactly The Spring is.
Sure. So The Spring is an organization who we call ourselves a victim service provider for victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And so one of the ways that we provide services that we really consider our bread and butter is through emergency crisis shelter for victims who are fleeing their situation. Yeah. So kind of reactive in services. If they are leaving their situation, they can come and receive emergency crisis shelter and crisis de-escalation and wraparound services through our shelter. But we also do a lot of education and prevention work, so community-facing services to help advocate for victims, but also to help people from not becoming a victim. So that's what we do in a high level.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and you guys, I think it's important to note, you serve the actual whole state of Oklahoma, correct?
Yes, we are one of only 3 service providers in the state who are certified through the Oklahoma Attorney General to provide services to victims of human trafficking. So we serve all 77 counties here in Oklahoma, but we also serve survivors from out of state. Because in a lot of states, there are just not service providers at all for those types of victims.
Sure. You guys have a facility where people can actually live, at least temporarily. Is that correct?
Yes. So I keep saying emergency crisis shelter. Typically, people will stay anywhere from about 30 to 90 days, depending on their situation. We have some that stay longer, but yes, we have a 70-bed facility located in the Tulsa area where we can house up to 70 people at any time who are needing shelter and food and clothing and basic needs and counseling and all of those things that they need to stay independent of their situation.
Great. And do you provide services for the entire family, like the children as well as the...
Yeah, so we are one of the few shelters in the state. I did mention there's only 3 in the state for human trafficking, but we also serve victims of domestic violence. But yes, the victim can come in with their children. So we're not going to bring in we're not doing reconciliation for marriage, right? But sure. Yes, victims can flee and come with their children. One thing that I should say is that a minor victim could not come in on their own.
Right.
We're not certified through DHS to provide services to minors alone, but we do allow victims to bring in their children, which is pretty unique for our state. In fact, 51% of the people we served last year in 2022 were children.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a great service, and there's so much involved in it. I've gotten to be a commissioner on the Commission for the Status of Women in Oklahoma, and we've toured a couple of different facilities and just looked at problems that face women in Oklahoma in general, which, I mean, there are
expansive.
many.
Yes.
But there are just not very many places available, and when you are a victim of domestic violence or stalking or trafficking, it has to feel so hopeless because you don't see a lot of you don't see a way out.
Yeah, for sure.
From the victims that we've gotten to speak with, but those facilities provide just amazing care and opportunities. And if you are someone listening and that is your current situation, reach out. We are going to give all the information at the end of this interview for you to have, so that you could get in contact with Leslie's organization, The Spring, and if you know someone who is in a dangerous situation, also we'll you could pass that information along, and I'm sure Leslie has pointers on even how to do that in a safe manner, because it's scary trying to get out of a situation, and often those situations can lead to death. We have learned. Okay, so you are a mom. You serve in other ministries, and you have just a regular life. How did you begin? How did you end up at the Spring?
I love that you say I have a regular life. That's almost laughable, huh?
Well, a regular crazy life like everyone else.
Yes, yeah, I am busy, for sure. So my background is, I didn't go to college for this, right? Like when I started out and leaving high school, go to college, I didn't go to college to go into social work or social services. But I found the Lord as an adult. I was 24 years old, having a baby, and my husband and I both came to the Lord together. As an adult, was not raised in a Christian home, but I will say from the second that transformation happened, I started to really feel a calling on my life. People who know me would not disagree with this statement, but I'm I like to say a loud, kind of bold personality.
Welcome to the club.
I don't hold back. I'm the Enneagram 8. So my whole life, even before coming to the Lord, I knew I was an advocate. I always spoke up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. That was kind of just innate in me. So anyways, long story short, when I found the Lord, really started to feel this calling on my life. Wasn't sure how to articulate that. Didn't even know what that meant really then. Didn't have words for that. But started going through the process of just feeling called to something bigger. And so I stepped into ministry and went on staff at a church that is now another church that I now attend. It's a story for another day. And went into ministry really not knowing what in the world I was doing, right? Just knew like I was on fire for the Lord and I wanted to reach people. And through that process, began to meet with a life coach and go through really articulating like what was the Lord calling me to? What was my why? What was my your 1 degree? That's a process that you can go through to find out. And found out that I loved advocating for people. I loved speaking up for people, and that I had a passion for the marginalized and the oppressed, and just really making sure that those people weren't overlooked. And so women and children fell into that category a lot for me. I was blessed to be a part of building and launching an orphanage in West Africa that I'm now the vice president of the board for the organization, get to go over to Africa. So all along the way, I articulated through life coaching and wrestling with the Lord and the Holy Spirit that I really have a passion specifically for women who are marginalized, oppressed, and helping to step up and bring reform, right? To step into legislation where our laws are antiquated and are not working well for the victims, right? And stepping up and just really using my voice to do that. And so an opportunity came open after I really figured out what the Lord was calling me to come on staff at the Spring. And so I stepped into that. It was an easy yes, because it aligned with everything that I had spent 6.5 years wrestling with the Lord. What are you calling me to, right? So I stepped into that space as assistant director and was on staff for almost 2 years when the executive director role opened up, and I was asked to step in as interim executive director to kind of just lead the ship while we went through the process of who's the executive director supposed to be. And then 10 months later, I was named as the executive director after they did a nationwide search. But I appreciate them doing their due diligence. So yes, that's how I got to the Spring in a very short nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's great. So you kind of find your spot, and then I know you have worked on, and I'm sure a team of people with you, because you've mentioned that you have a really good crew that helps you outside of this. But tell me a little bit about the human trafficking piece, because I feel like in Oklahoma, that is a thing that exists.
It is.
It doesn't always look like
Here to
the
tell
movies.
you it is.
Everyone always is like, you mean like the movie Taken?
No.
Like that? And I'm like, that is a piece of it, but there are other forms of trafficking, and maybe because of our particular location close to Texas, there are other forms of trafficking. So if you don't care, just kind of give a give a definition and explain kind of some of the different types of trafficking that exist in our state?
Sure. Yeah. So an interesting fact about the Spring is that we were the first agency to receive our certification through the Attorney General's office in the state of Oklahoma.
Right.
And then we have since gone on to help the other two organizations, specifically DVIS in the Tulsa area, get their certification. And we did that in 2011. So we've been in this work for 12 years. Yeah. And we've learned a lot of things the hard way, right? So we stepped up and said, this is happening. And we knew it was happening because we were seeing it in the people who were coming in through domestic violence, right? And as we got into their story, we began to realize that there was another crime being committed against them, in addition to domestic violence. And this surprises people. A lot of what we see and what we have seen over the last 12 years is really what we call interfamilial trafficking. And so it's not taken, right? It's not a stranger kidnapping someone. It's not the white van that's coming in and following the mom around Hobby Lobby and then tying zip ties to their door handle. All this misinformation that we see, it's not that, right? It is husband forcing his wife to have sex with the landlord for rent. Or it is mom forcing her teenage daughter to have sex with her drug dealer in exchange for drugs, right? So the legal definition of human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to force someone to commit a commercial sex act in exchange for something of value. However, in a person under the age of 18, there doesn't have to be evidence or use of force, fraud, or coercion. It just has to be using someone forcing someone to do, I shouldn't use force because I just said not force, causing someone to commit a commercial sex act in exchange for something of value. That doesn't have to be exchange of money, right? And another misconception that we have is that a person has to be transported or moved to be trafficked. That's human smuggling. That's a lot of where the myth of, well, we're the crossroads of I-44 and I-35, that does happen. There are people who kidnap people and force them into the sex trade, of course, but that's a very, very minimal of what we see. And so normally we see the preying upon vulnerabilities, whether that's economic vulnerabilities, whether that's a child aging out of the foster care system, kids from broken homes, they're being groomed and coerced and brought into a relationship under fraudulent purposes or coercion, and then are forced into the commercial sex industry. So that's what we see mostly within Oklahoma and specifically within the victims that we serve at the Spring.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't you give us a little background on maybe who the most vulnerable are, which you've already mentioned, kids and women. But can you explain how a trafficker might begin to groom a victim?
Absolutely. So first of all, they target the victim. We see a lot of people who you might even not think are vulnerable be targeted specifically through social media. Social media has changed the game for traffickers. They don't need to go out and force someone into a car, right? They can see a status update on social media that simply says, I'm bored, right? So they're targeting someone who's saying, hey, I'm looking for something to do. I'm bored. I've got too much time on my hands, right?
Yeah.
That could be a vulnerability. So they're going to target that victim. Oftentimes they are searching for some sort of indication that there's a need to be met, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, economic, something like that. So they're going to target that victim. And then they're going to reach out and begin to build trust. They don't come in looking like scary monsters saying, I'm going to traffic you, right? They come in looking very charming, very interested in you, filling or meeting an emotional, need, something like that. And then they're going to spend sometimes months, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It's months of breaking that person down, developing that trust. And then they begin to isolate the victim. So they begin to tell the victim about how their family doesn't understand them, how I'm the one who loves you. Those people don't listen to your friends. They're just selfish and want you to themselves, something like that, right? So then they're going to isolate, and then that's usually when the abuse or the force, fraud, or coercion is going to begin, right? So they're going to slowly ask you to, we're in this relationship, I've bought you these things, will you send me that picture? Will you do this certain thing? And then they have something that they then use to threaten.
Right.
And to keep control of that victim to where then they don't have a choice but to say, okay, I'll do this in exchange that you don't threaten or hurt my family. You don't share that picture all over my school. You don't send that to my church, right? So very, very thought out, calculated process for the trafficker. And they're going to look for vulnerabilities almost right off the bat to get that relationship started.
Yeah. So scary and sad.
Absolutely.
One thing I think is kind of a common misconception too is that there may be an old man in his basement hiding, when in fact a lot of times it's going to be someone in their peer group who has been groomed to even be a recruiter.
Yes.
And you can't hardly imagine that someone who has been abused would go find someone else for them to abuse. But I think that's really important to note, because as a parent or a grandparent, if you're kind of watching, as we all should be, you need to pay attention.
Absolutely.
To who you definitely need to be paying attention to the social media accounts, but you also need to pay attention to kind of who they are with.
Yeah.
And people are busy. Parents, grandparents, caretakers. You're often busy with work, or you're checked out, or kind of maybe living your own life and not paying as close of attention as you might need to be. And we've all been there. Listen, zero judgment.
I have
on
3
that.
kids and a full-time job and a volunteer job. And
like it is hard to keep up with. So what would you guys, I'm going to let you share a couple of stories of some victims that you guys have ministered to and who are now really taking back some power and doing some advocacy themselves and sharing their stories. But what would they tell you for a parent or a grandparent, whoever's taking care of the kids, to be looking for? Like,
yeah, so you hit on a couple of things. I think it's true that we might have a fabricated image of what a trafficker might look like, right? We've all, like you said, the scary guy in the basement. Well, that does happen, right?
Yes.
There are people who sit and do that. So rare, right? I always like to tell people, I get asked a lot, like, what's the typical, like, profile of a trafficker? What's the typical profile of a victim? They look like you and I. Right. And oftentimes, like you said, they can be in your peer group. They can, I say hurt people. And yes, people who have been victimized will go out and victimize others for self-preservation, right? So I can...
Yes, because they're forced to,
Yes, I can get in good with my pimp and he won't do this to me anymore as long as I go recruit. Or maybe oftentimes victims don't even realize they're being victimized because they've developed that trust relationship and they have a trauma bond with their trafficker, right? I mean, they love me, he, she. Also, traffickers can be women. Absolutely.
Yes, they can.
We've seen that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to mention that, and I love that you brought that up. But the other thing, when you talk about red flags, there are red flags to the trained eye, right? They're very subtle. It's not, like I said, it's such a slow fade. So you've got to be really serious about watching changes in patterns and behavior with people who are close to you. So if you do start seeing some isolation and some withdrawal, might be a good time to start asking why. We oftentimes see if kids spend a lot of time in the bathroom with their devices, pretty big red flag.
Okay.
Right? There may be someone trying to get them to go away from parents or where they can't be caught, something like that. But most of the time, it's going to be very, very subtle things. And so what I like to say is, yes, we need to look for the red flags, but more importantly, we need to be proactive. And we need to have very candid, transparent conversations with our children, even at very, very young ages, right?
Yes. Yeah.
A 5-year-old can navigate YouTube and a chat could pop up and you don't have as a parent, you don't think that that's happening to a 5-year-old when it could be. So we need to be having conversations with our kids. I heard this example actually at a panel event we did the other day by a federal investigator, and she said, we don't just give our kids the keys at 16 to go drive the car. We've spent a long time in the car with them, talking to them about how to drive it, teaching them the rules of the road. We shouldn't just hand the keys to cell phones and internet, right, to our kids without having very serious conversations with them about who might be on the other end and what safe interactions are, and then open the dialogue of you can come talk to me in the event that this ever happens, right?
Right.
If you ever find yourself in this situation, come talk to me and we'll navigate it. And so there are red flags, right? Isolation, children who were maybe very involved in sports or school suddenly are uninterested in those things. Maybe they change the way they dress. Maybe they're a little bit more provocative and the dress doesn't fit the weather, or opposite. Maybe that person's controlling them, telling them that they, they're body shaming them or something. Right. So we just watching for patterns like that just seem a
little bit off.
Just a little bit off, right? And don't wait until they're way off.
Yeah.
Start asking those questions early on. And then new friend groups, suddenly shucking old friends and having new, there's some things to look for sure. But most of them are going to be very slow, subtle signs. So be proactive and have those conversations ahead of time.
Yes. Keep up with what is on your kid's phone.
Yeah, much as you can. Try to keep up. That's what I was about to say.
You cannot. And they're at some point they will have access. So I think teaching them how to use that is much better plan than just saying, never do that. Well, that's
and
great.
Traffickers are getting incredibly smart. Like they're, Fortnite. Every kid on the planet's on Fortnite. Yeah. So they're asking them, I'll start giving you these, what do they call them, V-Bucks. Okay. Right. And here's the V-Bucks just because I want to play with you and it's fun and I want you to, right. Yeah. And it starts that. And then it's, well, if you want me to keep giving you V-Bucks, you need to do this for me. Right. So, I mean, they're everywhere. So I don't say that to scare everyone. We can't realistically take technology away from our kids. We live in a technological world,
to learn how to navigate.
But we need to be teaching our kids about safe interactions and what is appropriate to be asked of you and what is not. And that there really may be somebody, let's not trust everyone. We live in a digital world where we want to trust strangers. Yeah. We used to shout stranger danger, don't walk up to a stranger on the street, and we don't. But we'll walk up to a stranger on Fortnite and call them our friend. Yeah. Right? They're not your friend, and not everyone's trustworthy. So make sure you're having those conversations. Yes. And I wouldn't just say with your kids. We're seeing huge increase in college women being recruited and through the boyfriending, through the grooming, through sugar daddies, like crazy stuff. And these college women are falling prey to this. So women who are matured are still falling prey to this. So you asked for a story. We're starting to see more and more depression, right? I think COVID isolated us to a point of no return, and we're just now seeing the repercussions of that. And so we're seeing people, I won't even just say women, people, but specifically women and children who are navigating depression, a lack of self-confidence. They're comparing themselves to people on social media, feeling like they more and more have to be provocative. We have an increasingly more sexual culture. Yes, and we do. It's crazy. It's acceptable, right?
Totally,
like sexting in high school is like the thing to do now. So people who, before it was much easier to recruit and groom people with high vulnerabilities. It's becoming more and more easy to see women and children who come from stable homes with all the supports in place be recruited. And so there is a case, a girl who was recruited through Snapchat, and I use the word recruit. It was very nonchalant and unassuming, right? Yeah. But that's what that person was doing. And she found herself slowly developing this relationship with this person on Snapchat, this guy, and he was who he said he was, right? Yeah. He didn't like hide his face, and she ended up sending nudes and things like that, and it got so deep down the path that he had so much on her that he then threatened to send her whole school. So then he had her doing certain things that she otherwise wouldn't have. Right. Her family didn't even know this until she was so depressed and so far gone that she was cutting. So mom started seeing physical scars, right? So then, long story short, she was brave enough to step up. The pictures were distributed to her entire school.
They were?
They were. They're still all over the internet. There's still the FBI and the NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, still are trying to find her pictures everywhere. But she stepped up and prosecuted and brought that forward and basically said, I got to where I was so bad and I didn't have anything to lose at that point, and so I just wanted to make sure this didn't happen to anybody else. Unfortunately, when they went and arrested this person, because she saved the evidence. That's another thing. Please, parents, if you find stuff on your kids' phones, please do not delete it.
Don't delete it.
Don't step in. Let the people who are trained to do that do that. But there were hundreds of other victims that he had pictures of that had been sold all over Pornhub and everywhere. And she would say there were no signs. I was still an A+ student. I was still engaging in sports. I was still putting my smile on. And it wasn't until I had physical scars that my parents began to see it. And so she would say with her own words, have those conversations early, because nobody told me the dangers that were, just lying around on my cell phone.
Yeah.
Like, I thought that this was some cute guy that really liked me.
Yeah.
In all reality, he got me so twisted and so manipulated that I didn't know right from wrong. I thought I was choosing this. I wasn't. It was actual coercion. So now she actually... they're still finding victims that they didn't know about before that are coming forward from this guy who had done this to her. Yeah. So she was brave and courageous. Not every person has that ending, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes the endings are not happy. We have worked on the commission. Human trafficking is our current topic throughout the end of this year. So we're doing community conversations.
Yes, I do. I'm speaking
tomorrow, which will be already behind us by the time this airs. But they have talked about it, trying to come up with a good statistic for how many people this affects and how difficult it is to actually find a statistic, because these crimes so often are involved in other crimes with drugs and sometimes labor trafficking and all kinds of things. So we don't have it's hard to get an accurate count.
Yeah.
Do you have any stats that you think are worth sharing, or any information like that is specific to Oklahoma? Maybe just how many people you guys serve.
Yeah. So, you're right. Data collection is hard. That's one of the things we've been fighting for the last 12 years, is people wanting to say it doesn't happen because there's no data on it. But we're here to tell you, 12 years into it, it is happening. We like to joke and say, people want evidence-based research. We're like, we are the evidence-based research. We're serving people, right? I am happy to report that the state of Oklahoma has written into legislation that we will house a database and management system within the Oklahoma Attorney General's office. I actually get to sit on the team to help establish that and what that looks like. But there's a couple of reasons why it's bad, all the ones you mentioned, but oftentimes victims don't know they're victims, right? They don't even have words to say of what has happened to them. They don't understand and it's an actual crime has been committed. Yeah. And choice and coercion can look a lot alike, right? So no, I chose to do this. It was just that one time because he's done so much for me and we were behind on our bills. So I went and had sex with the landlord, right? I chose that. Well, no, you didn't, because we know the history of the grooming and manipulation. But also people just don't know how to identify it. We're looking for the taken van that's kidnapping people, and we're saying, well, nobody's getting kidnapped in my neighborhood, so must not be sex trafficking, right? Yeah. So lots of reasons why the data isn't good. However, I'm encouraged that we are starting to work out that.
Yeah, but the legislature is making progress.
They're starting to go. It is happening.
Things are happening. It just takes a long time.
Yeah, and we like to, we don't use the word prostitute in our field. We say prostituted persons because we truly believe that nobody as a little girl or a little boy says, I want to grow up and be a prostitute. They're not choosing that vocation in a dignified way. They're being coerced and being groomed and abused into that field. And then they think they have no choice, to come out. So we're starting to recognize prostitution as the victim, the person being prostituted is the victim. And let's start punishing the buyers, right? Let's stop punishing the people being forced to do this. So back to your question. We have some statistics, that we track and that we house, and we're seeing a major increase in people who are calling us for help. I think because we're starting to put a name to it, and people are starting to actually recognize what trafficking is. And in fact, during COVID, in almost a 1-month time span, our calls to our emergency crisis hotline that's listed nationally as someone who can help you. Our calls increased by 91%, almost overnight, for people calling, seeking help. Last year, we answered and triaged over 2,000 crisis calls to our crisis hotline. We served 2,200 unduplicated individuals through our services. We're seeing human trafficking victims. Our length of stay has increased, which is encouraging to us because it means they're engaging in our programs and they're not going back to their situation.
Odds to not go back. Yeah.
So our length of stay last year increased 75%. And so I think there's a lot attributing to that. We're now having people step in the gaps to provide services because it's a multi-sector approach to serve these people, right? They're the most traumatized, the most poly-victimized people, I think, on our planet. I would stand firm in saying that. And so we're starting to see community people and resources step up so that we can serve them so that they can stay and get the hope and healing that they need. Numbers are really hard to give. I think in between 2019 and 2022, we only saw in Tulsa maybe 36 cases that were brought forward as human trafficking because our laws are not awesome. Right. It's hard to prosecute, very hard to prove coercion, very hard to get a victim to testify because they know their trafficker, even if sentenced, are going to get out, probably on bail.
No,
right?
It's true. Yeah.
And come find them. So yeah, I have a lot to say about that, but I'll just leave it at that there are statistics. Yeah. They're coming together, but they're low because we've just got a lot of reform that needs to happen, both in our laws and in our community to provide services. Yeah.
Too, I think you live in Tulsa, which we're in Atoka, and in a larger city, I think you might not see as much. I mean, it's so much larger, and obviously there are more people who would be vulnerable, but you almost can avoid it in your day-to-day life. Yeah. And poverty is such an issue in the entire state of Oklahoma, and all of the stats say that. And I think that makes you a lot more vulnerable 100%. Because you've talked about the victims not thinking they were victims, because if you need something, and that is a way to get paid. Sometimes that's the easiest way to get paid, and sometimes yourself is all you have to negotiate with, which is very alarming, and I think that makes it tricky as well for people to realize. And it sounds like, well, no one would ever do that, but if you need groceries, or your mom tells you we don't have the rent, or a guy offers to, or even to a guy, if you can get some new shoes out of the deal or something that you need, it's a little harder to turn down. If it's actually a need.
Absolutely. We see a lot of our youth who have aged out of foster care. Yes. I mean, everyone knows, they age out, and if there's not a mentor or someone, they don't have family, they're being dropped off at a bus station with $20, right? And traffickers know that. Yes. I'm going to go right here because this person needs a house, and I can be your family, right? I do a lot of training on trafficking, and especially to counselors and people, and they'll say something about, oftentimes they talk a lot about their mom, and I'm like, well, you need to ask questions about that mom, because traffickers use family as a huge mechanism to, and a way to get those people into where they feel like they belong, so that they then can coerce them into, well, I'm giving you a roof over your head. Let's go have sex with this person. And no, you're not getting the money, but you're getting a roof over your head. Right. So yes, poverty, lack of social support, lack of family belonging, all of those things are huge vulnerabilities. And we're seeing a lot of trafficking in our homeless population in Tulsa. And I would say, throughout the state. I do a lot of work, not just in Tulsa, but because the economic stress of that. And so, they may see it as survival sex when they're actually being used by someone in exchange for a commercial sex act. That is trafficking, right? Yeah. Sure.
It is just a problem that has to be looked at. And I think, too, the church, that's really an opportunity to step in and offer ministry. And if you're not trained to deal with some of that, you probably do want to connect with someone that is, but just serving the marginalized within our communities and keeping our eyes open. There's a ministry in Durant, which the commission is going to visit next month. It's called J127, and it is for girls who have aged out of the foster care system. And I love that because there's
vulnerable.
nothing, and
Yes.
and they are a built-in support system. So she's going to come on the podcast, their
That's
director,
amazing.
and talk to us about that. But just filling in those gaps. And
Yes. You know, one thing else I don't mean to cut.
No, you're good.
Okay.
Go.
One thing else I like to say to the church. So the Spring is a faith-based organization.
Yes.
We are the only faith-based certified agency in the state for human trafficking. We are unapologetically faith-based.
Yeah.
We don't discriminate. I always like to say that. You do not have to be faith-based to get our services.
Sure.
You don't have to be cleaned up to get our services. Like none of that. We will serve anybody, anytime.
Yes,
We don't
sure.
care your identity, none of that. But we are faith-based. And one thing that I have churches ask me to come and speak all the time, and they want to share, like, how do we get involved? What do we do? And one challenge I always issue to the church in general is, the human sex trafficking business and is a $150 billion industry in our world. And there wouldn't be $150 billion in profit generated if there wasn't a demand for the product. Humans are creating the demand for commercial sex, and the church is not exempt. And if you're looking at pornography, you are contributing to the commercial sex trade.
Yeah.
You are
you are.
contributing, and I think our churches have to step in to that space and have those difficult conversations from the pulpit and speak about just the moral relativism that's happening in our world. Christians and non-Christians alike, the porn stats are exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's sometimes higher within the church, right? Of people who will admit, that's the ones
that's
who will
just the
admit
ones-
it,
yeah,
right? And it's not just men,
it's not.
there's females looking
That's
at
right.
it at an alarming rate. And so I think the church, yes, we need to step out and serve, but we also got to look internally and say, am I contributing in any way to this $150 billion industry? Am I creating a demand in any way to this industry? Because porn stars would tell you, it's not glamour, right? It's they're being forced to do things they don't want to do. It's often physical, and this is the hard topics that we have to talk about. Our society is becoming more and more depraved, and you want to know why people are going after children? Because it's being demanded more and more, because what once fulfilled our desires, our fleshly desires, is no longer doing that. And it truly rewires your brain. And I think of, the scripture that says we're to fix our minds on what is pure and noble and right and true. And when we're fixing our minds on things that are not, we're going to follow that desire, right? And so what are we doing, church? What are we doing, pastors, to talk to people in our church and not create a culture of shame, but to go, we get it's a problem.
Yes.
So what can we do to help make sure that we're not contributing to the demand for this product, unfortunately?
No, for sure. And you could maybe hide and not see certain things, but even things on network TV. It's unbelievable. And because we're leaving our TVs on.
Absolutely.
I'm not exempt from that either.
Yeah.
I may not be on a porn site, but if I'm watching a show that is selling advertising to someone that's getting paid, and the show goes against every literal thing that I believe, I'm feeding the animal.
Feeding the monster. And I'm not a legalist by any means.
I'm not either,
right?
But I do think you have to kind of pay attention.
Yes, you have to protect your mind.
Yeah.
You have to protect, and you have to, watch what you're showing your kids.
Yeah.
Make sure you're having conversations with those teenage boys. Look, curiosity doesn't mean guilt.
No.
And when you see your teenage boy or not even teenage anymore, 10-year-old boy is Googling on Roblox something that's maybe they shouldn't be.
Right.
Don't create shame. Go and say, hey, this is normal, but this is how we view this from a biblical worldview, right? Or just even from a humanity worldview.
Right. Yeah, no kid. That's right. Well, because sexuality is healthy sexuality is not evil or wrong,
right?
Or should it be? It's not shameful,
right?
But
it's being distorted.
It's twisted, and when people are exploited and forced and coerced and even just kind of lured in, that takes it to a whole. It's a different conversation.
Absolutely, yes. Whole other podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Really, we don't even have time for that one today. One thing also that I want to encourage, I'll say the church, but really any listener, any member of society, sometimes you got to get your checkbook out to help fight things that you don't like.
Yes, please.
And I know the Spring offers so many good services, and we've focused a lot on human trafficking, but the domestic violence piece is huge.
Yes.
And I've personally seen the work that goes into helping families get out of that situation. It is definitely possible to get out and get help, but not without places like the Spring.
Yes.
So if someone wanted to give or learn more about the Spring, or if somebody wanted to maybe have you come and speak to their school, their congregation, their women's group, Chamber of Commerce, I know you can educate a lot of different ways now. How would they get to you and find that information?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you brought that up. I am unapologetic about asking for money as a nonprofit because you have to be. Yeah, because what you said, we can't provide these services. Every victim that comes into our shelter receives our services at zero charge to them. We give it completely away for free because we do not want to take the position of their trafficker.
Right.
You got to pay. You have to pay us to receive food, clothing, shelter, safety. Like, no, so everything is at no charge to those we serve. And something that's kind of crazy to think since we're in 2023 is there is no federal or state funding. There's no state funding that comes down to victim service providers for human trafficking in the state of Oklahoma. Every dollar we earn for those victims, we have to go raise.
Right.
It's getting there, and we're writing in legislation because people are like, maybe these people would
call your representatives.
Right. Yes, please call your representatives. But yeah, maybe I would better serve those victims if I could actually serve them and didn't have to go spend all my time raising money. Right. But to answer your question, we have a website. It's thespringok.org, and you can go there. It tells about all of the services that we do. If you want me to come speak, train me, or somebody on our team, we did actually launch a training and speaking and consulting service that now we charge for so that it can go back into funding of our operations. So one big thing, this is just an example of some of the things that we're helping to do. We partner with St. Francis Health Network, and we're helping them. They're retaining us to help them build their human trafficking response program within all of their medical locations so that they know how to identify victims. So we will come speak, we'll come educate, we'll come train. There are some things that we just do that we feel like we owe to the community at no charge, of course. Education, awareness, all those things. So everything that you need to see is on our website. If you are someone who's needing help, the website can help you get that as well. We do know that the most lethal time, the most dangerous time for someone trying to flee is when they are trying to flee.
Yes.
It's the most dangerous time, and so it needs to be handled appropriately and with care. But that information, our 24-hour-a-day hotline is on that. And then also you can just go on there with your handy-dandy credit card and donate if you'd like.
Make a donation.
We do have what we call the Well. It's our tribe of monthly supporters. We just say that we want to be a provision of just living water for those we serve, and so we ask people to join us on a monthly occurrence to donate monthly, and you can sign up for that on our website as well. So everything you need is at thespringok.org.
Okay, great. I think the last thing I was going to ask you is, you mentioned the most crucial time and the most dangerous time of someone trying to escape either trafficking or domestic violence or stalking is when you are trying to get away or get out.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for somebody that might be in that situation, or for someone who may have a friend or a family member that they're trying to help?
Yeah, so we like to say that victims don't leave their situations; they escape. They truly escape them, right? It's not just they don't just leave them. And so for victims, if you find yourself in a dangerous situation and you know you need to leave, find a time that is safe to do so. Meaning, if you need to call us for help, do it when it's safe. Maybe your abuser has left to go to the store. Maybe your abuser is passed out. And it's safe for you to communicate, with us. Yeah. Call us and we walk you through that. We safety plan with you. We talk to you about when it is. It may not be safe for you to flee right now. Our staff and our advocates are trained to walk you through that process. So find a time that is safe for you to call to do so. And we understand if you need to hang up suddenly or if you need to act like we're the pizza person. We are trained. We know that. But for someone who might notice a situation, maybe you know somebody in your life who you think needs to flee, do not have that conversation in front of the abuser ever. Do not provoke that, not like they're controlling, aren't you crazy? Give our hotline or our website to them and say, go check this out when it's safe to do so. They also may not be ready to leave, so please don't try to force them to do that. Unfortunately, some people, they either know that they can't at that time. It's not safe for them or their kids or their pets or whomever to do that. So I would just say don't provoke that or don't have that conversation in front of the abuser at all. Please don't shame them or try to guilt them into leaving. They don't leave, they escape. And just equip them with either our phone number or our website and just say, hey, notice something's going on. I don't know what, and that, but there are people to help you if you need it. And so I would say be very delicate with that conversation. We're seeing murder suicides in massive alarming
numbers
rates.
Have gone up.
There are red flags, and many people that have come to us at the spring have said, I wouldn't have even known you existed if someone didn't notice something was wrong and just simply give me the hope that there were people who could help me. So I would say if you see something, say something, but do so delicately and safely.
Great. Well, listen, thank you so much for educating us and sharing some of the stories and some of the hope that there is hope. And again, if you are somebody listening to this and you are in a desperate situation, there is hope.
Absolutely.
There is hope. We will leave the phone numbers and the website in the show description underneath this. And I really appreciate you and the work that the spring does. Look forward to just seeing what all you guys continue to do as you make a difference in the state of Oklahoma. Thanks so much.
And thank you for your work, Marcy, on the commission and on just bringing attention to this topic, because it is happening in our state, and the more people who are educated and aware, the better we can serve victims and increase our capacity as a state. So thank you for leading the way on that.
You are welcome. Thanks again. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, please like, follow, and hit subscribe to keep up with all future episodes. We'd also love for you to leave us a 5-star review. That wraps it up for today's Marcy in the Middle. And remember, whatever you're in the middle of, you're not alone. We'll see you next time.